back. Hope you had a really nice, restful weekend. Uh, got a big week ahead of us as we approach final exams. So I haven't heard about when they'll be just yet. But as soon as I hear something from Mrs. Hawkins of the county, I'll be sure to let you guys know. If you want to, I'm gonna open up Schoology and let you guys kind of take a look at our schedule for the week. So today is January the 11th. So we're looking at a journal entry every day this week. So make sure that you're keeping up with your journals. And then today we're going to do some notes on modules on a new module, Module 6, activities for 6-1 tomorrow, notes, activity, and then notes again. All right, so not kind of getting back into a routine where we were before the remote schedule started. So without further ado, go ahead and open your notes, and we'll begin Module 6, Lesson 1. And Module 6, Lesson 1 is entitled Regional Economies. So, it really has to do with some changes that we see in the early days of America. Kind of post the presidencies of Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, moving into like Andrew Jackson, the Age of Jackson, which we'll see later on in this module. But for today, talk a little bit about some industrial changes. And during the 19th century, there were a lot of new approaches when it came to how to manufacture things. And this gentleman right here, whose name is Eli Whitney, he really pioneered a lot of factory methods that are really still used today, like the factory system, which uses power-driven machinery and laborers to do specialized tasks. This made mass production possible, and mass production is just simply a large quantity of producing things. So the changes brought to light by people like Eli Whitney and many, many others, like Samuel Slater, lots of others, they brought about what's called the Industrial Revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution had been going on in Great Britain for quite some time, but it does come to the United States in this time period. So you begin to see machines replacing hand tools and the introduction of large-scale factory production. Okay? All right, so a couple events really lead to an increase in the United States manufacturing. One is Thomas Jefferson's Embargo Act, and he creates this embargo in 1807, and his embargo was a way to try to prevent America from getting involved in a foreign conflict. But what it does is what it literally did is prohibited Americans from shipping any goods to Europe. And so the embargo totally brought American shipping and trade to a standstill, and we once had a very thriving foreign trade. So in response to this, Americans had to produce their own things. So also, not to mention the War of 1812, just as when the War of 1812 breaks out, and the British Navy had blockaded most of our coastlines, and ships unable to get in or out of American harbors, Americans had to were still in need of a lot of goods, so we just had to make it ourselves. And so that's why these two things increase American manufacturing. The embargo doesn't allow us to trade. In the War of 1812, we were unable to trade because of the blockade. So we still needed manufactured goods, so we begin to produce them ourselves. And that's where we enter a man by the name of Samuel Slater, who in 1793, he immigrated to the United States from Great Britain and established the first ever successful textile factory in America. Now, he modeled it after ones he had seen in Great Britain, as he was a mechanic that worked on the machines in Britain, but he memorized the designs, and they were totally secret. And when he comes to America, he reconstructs the entire mechanism by memory. So it's pretty impressive. And people take what Samuel Slater bring and evolve it over time, so that by you know within a few years, you begin to see these large sprawling textile mills like the one. This is the one in Lowell, Massachusetts. Um, Basically, using the plans of Samuel Slater and other um, cloth manufacturing facilities, they created a very large operation which triggered this town called Lowell, which totally exemplifies the Industrial Revolution in the United States. Beginning to see factories like the one at Lowell appear all throughout New England. Such factories, they're going to be located near moving water, so you're going to see a lot of factories near rivers, because the rivers could provide the power to drive the machinery through wheels, wagon wheels, and water wheels, not wagon wheels, water wheels. So these things in turn helped New England become the heart of the Industrial Revolution. But it wasn't like that everywhere. You have two economic systems that really develop in the United States. Northeasterners, prompted by the changing economic conditions, invested their money in machines and manufacturing and factories. Cash crops did not grow very well in the northeastern soil and climate. But the fertile soil of the South was great for growing cash crops like cotton, tobacco. Not to mention, with the invention of the cotton gin, Southerners could begin to reap huge profits from cash crops like cotton. Agriculture still existed in the North. It wasn't totally eliminated, but the land type and the growth of cities encouraged farmers to cultivate smaller crops, and they didn't require as much land. So farmers in the North usually only started out only growing what their families needed, and then spread outward, usually raising one or two types of crops or livestock like corn, wheat, cows, pigs, and then whatever they had extra they could sell at city markets. Such grains like crops, or some crops like grains and corn, did not require as much labor to grow, nor were they hugely profitable, and so a great amount of labor was not required in the form of slaves. So slavery doesn't catch on in the North. There's just not much demand for it. But that was not the case in the South, where cotton was king. The South provided an ideal environment for a growing number of crops like cotton, and it wasn't extremely popular until Eli Whitney creates his cotton gin, short for the cotton engine, in 1793, but which turns cotton into an extremely profitable crop for plantation owners. So, since the cotton gin could now clean 50 times the amount of cotton that a slave could in a day, this is going to cause an increase in the need for production because they can manufacture faster. So that it really cemented and solidified the need for slavery. The cotton gin did, because it's extremely labor intensive to grow and harvest. It still needed to have workers for doing that. So slavery really is cemented in the South as a result of the cotton gin. So slavery becomes entrenched, and this is what a cotton gin looks like. It's a pretty simple machine. It has these teeth that really rake through and clean the fibers and clean the seeds out. Slavery becomes entrenched. Cotton production increases, and because of the cotton production increasing, the number of slaves is going to increase as well. So, now we were talking about America going through some changes, and as the North and South developed different economies, a plan was created to help the nation become increasingly important. And swept up in a patriotic fervor of love of America after the War of 1812, President Madison presented such a plan to Congress, and he hoped that this agenda would both unite the North and the South and create a strong economy that would make our nation completely self-sufficient. And his plan, along with Henry Clay, who's pictured here, had three major points. First part of the American system is developing transportation and other improvements internally. All right, so we're talking the building of roads, canals, railroads, national roads, increasing our infrastructure. That's going to be the first part of the American system. The second part is to establish a protective tariff. The tariff, it becomes known as the Tariff of 1816. I'll tell you a little bit about it in a minute. And also to resurrect the National Bank. This is the bank that Alexander Hamilton created. It is set to expire, and the American system, as proposed by Henry Clay, will resurrect it, bring it back. So, as Henry Clay explained it, the American system's to unite America's economic interests. Meanwhile, we're going to predominantly have different areas of the country producing certain things. Agriculture in the South, manufacturing in the North. A national currency is going to be needed. So, as you might imagine, though, these three things, not everybody's going to agree on how they're done. All right, and that's some of the things you're going to see as a result of this. But let's look at some of the internal improvements at first. As you see pictured here, this is called the National Road. Also, could be referred to as the Cumberland Road. It extends from Cumberland, Maryland, all the way to Vandalia, Illinois. It was one of our nation's first turnpikes. We have a turnpike in West Virginia, and it goes from Bluefield to Charleston. And why it's called a turnpike is because there's tolls on it. All right. Now, it's called a turnpike because at this time and in the times in Europe, whenever a road was built, they would have to pay toll. People would pay tolls on it to use it to pay for the construction of the road. And the way in which they would enforce these tolls is they would have soldiers stand at the road with a set of pikes or sharpened poles, basically preventing access. And then once you paid your toll, one of the soldiers would turn the pikes away so you could gain entrance. And that's where the name turnpike comes from. Now, we don't have any sharpened poles on our interstates, but the name is kind of stuck around. But this is going to be part of the internal improvements that began as a result of this American system. Lake Erie, all the way to New York. We're going to create the Erie Canal. Now, the Erie Canal is basically just a ditch, just a big ditch. It's gone from Lake Erie, and it's into the land, and it connects with the Hudson River near Albany, New York. Now, the Hudson River flows all the way to New York City. So you could literally, all the Great Lakes could be connected, and you could live in Chicago, Illinois, and get on a boat and end up in the Atlantic Ocean. So it opens up trade to the entire Midwest region of the United States. So it was a really big thing for shipping and trade. And it was a pretty massive undertaking as well. The tariff, we mentioned the tariffs. Tariffs were important to help protect American industry because what a tariff is a tax on anything that we imported goods, tax on imports. So what a tariff does effectively is it increases the price of foreign-made goods in the United States. So if it makes a foreign good more expensive, people might be more likely to purchase an American good, which might not be as expensive, but it'll be of a similar price because the other good will be more expensive. Okay, so many Northeasterners welcomed the protective tariffs. Particularly the tariff that James Madison proposes, the Tariff of 1816. And this is James Madison right here. Most Northeasterners welcomed it. However, people in the South and West, whose livelihoods did not depend on manufacturing, all it did to them is make their prices higher because they were the ones purchasing manufactured goods and not producing them. So they resented any government intervention when it came because it made the goods more expensive. So, but nevertheless, people like Henry Clay, who's from Kentucky, and John C. Calhoun managed to sway congressmen from their regions to approve the tariff of 1816 for the national interest. And that'll be an interesting debate in the decade to come. Um, Also, we talked about the bank, the Bank of the United States. Attitudes toward the proposed bank, were less divided. Banks performed several important functions. They granted loans, allowed people to buy land and tools, and really just provided finance for the development of our nation during the American Revolution, during the Industrial Revolution, sorry. And banks would also issue currency in the form of banknotes, paper slips that could be redeemed for gold or silver. And one problem was that the currency was not always universal. Each bank can have their own different currency, which was at that time it was okay. But many banks, they would never try to redeem their notes for gold, and so a lot of banks failed as a result of this. So many leaders agreed that a national bank, like the Bank of the United States, would benefit all. So the second bank, that's what this is, the second Bank of the United States, because the first one was the one Alexander Hamilton created, would make it available currency to be accepted nationwide, so a national currency. Be easier for people in the different regions to do business with one another with a single united currency. A national bank could lend money to smaller banks in case they, had an emergency, keep them from failing. So, in this practice, this would give the national bank some regulatory control over the smaller banks, thus helping to prevent some economic crises. So, in 1816, as part of the American system, Congress chartered the second Bank of the United States for 20 more years. So it's set. This new bank is going to be set to expire in 1836, and wouldn't you know, it'll be another cause for political dissent in 20 years. But most of all, we have a new national spirit. By the time the second bank was chartered, people were pretty pleased with the way the country is developing. We see huge technological leaps, including the birth of industrialism and the beginning of connecting our nation together with roads, railroads, and canals. All these things are promising to change our country's economy for the better, forever. And it's a pretty bright future. This optimism that comes out of the War of 1812, and this increased sense of nationalism, it really gives birth to the idea of the American dream. The notion that any individual could improve his or her own life through their own efforts, through their own hard work, through their own intelligence, which is not something that was really possible in other parts of the world. You could go to a bank, and with credit from a bank, you could buy land, you could open a business, and you can work to change your life for the better. That was not always something that was available to people in any other country in the world. So this new national spirit is also reflected in our politics when in 1816 Americans elected another Virginian named James Monroe. And soon after his inauguration, he did a kind of a tour of the nation. And when he went to New England, you wouldn't think that he would be extremely welcomed, seeing a Southern planter, agriculturalist, would not really be welcomed in a manufacturing place. But he was welcomed. He received a warm welcome. And a Boston newspaper even wrote that America had entered an era of good feelings, which is kind of a misnomer because the time period in which we're about to enter, not a lot of good feelings. In fact, it's known for a lot of political strife, anger, hostility, violence, racism. So the era of good feelings, misnomer, not exactly a very well-named era in American history. However, that's the era in which we are entering into in history class, the era of good feelings. So a misnomer simply means it's not labeled correctly. All right, so that's all I have for Module 6, Lesson 1. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm available to you pretty much all day long. And I hope that you guys are all well and look forward to seeing you guys in class soon. So take care.